Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Welcome to this somewhat, well, rainy and depressing grey day. But as you can see, I have a nice bright red test car behind me and spring will be starting tomorrow. So you may have recognized this car. This is the new Hyundai Kona, a car you have seen before on this channel. That was a hybrid, this is the electric. Now this video won't be about whether or not you should choose the hybrid or the electric, but I will try to point out the pros and cons of the new Hyundai Kona Electric. And as per usual, we start off by having a peek under the hood. Now before I open up the hood, I want to point out the location of the charge port, which is in front of the car. I personally prefer to have the charging port in the rear of the car, so I can drive backwards into a parking spot, which often is a dedicated charger spot. A lot of those charger spots are always near shopping malls and stores, and then you have a lot of people with shopping carts and children walking around. When you leave such a parking spot, in this car you have to back out, and you really have to rely on the cameras and sensors not to overrun anyone walking behind the car. Now this car stops automatically, but if you have to rely on your eyesight, the oversight through the rear windows and the rear windscreen isn't that great. It's usual with cars nowadays. So that's why I would rather have the charging port in the rear. But this also has a plus side, but I'll get to that in a second. So let's have a close-up look, and I have to have my notebook at hand. So the new Hyundai Kona comes in two battery sizes, a 48 and a 65 kilowatt hour battery, and with the different battery sizes come a different motor power output. The smaller battery size, which starts over here at just under 40,000 euros, has 114 kilowatt or 156 horsepower. This car is the top of the range trim level. It has the larger battery pack, has a starting price of 44,000 euros. Motor power output is 160 kilowatt or 218 horsepower. Both motors have the same torque rating, 255 Newton meters, and I'll blink the translations in screen. When it comes to performance, the smaller battery pack with a smaller, lower output motor has a top speed of 162 kilometers an hour, so just a tick over 100 miles an hour. And this version with a larger battery pack has a top speed of 172 kilometers an hour. When it comes to fast charging, on the 100 kilowatt DC charger, it'll charge within 41 minutes from 10 to 18%, goes for both battery versions. And on a 50 kilowatt charger DC, that is 60 minutes. Now if you have a public charging outlet, usually they have a power between 6 to 11 kilowatt, and depending on battery size, charging will take up 6 to 8 hours depending on power and battery size of this car. Other than that, there is nothing much to see here. My background is in mechanical engineering, so electronics and electrics is a bit of black magic to me. I will show you this. It has a small trunk. It's about 30 liters, so you can fit 2 pairs of shoes in here, and there's a panel over here you can put out, so you have access to the 12-volt battery that these cars always still have. I can see a lot of thermal management. There's an intricate system of lines with coolant and heat pumps going on here. I have to note that the new version of the Hyundai Kona comes as standard with a heat pump. The outgoing model and some of the very first Ioniq 5 didn't have that, and that means a massive decrease in efficiency. So you had to pay extra for having a heat pump, but that paid off really fast, and well, this car comes as standard with that. Well, with that, let's close up the hood and have a quick peek in the cargo area. My apologies for the noises in the background. I'm practically in the middle of nowhere over here, but on the other side of the canal they're installing fiber optic cables and electricity, and over there they're working on some concrete construction. But anyway, let's have a peek in the trunk. I can find the button. Of course, it has an electric trunk opener, this top of the range version. Now, I talked about the downsides of having the charge port in front of the car. One of the pros is you don't have any power electronics, no charger and no inverter and stuff going on in the trunk here. So the cargo space is exactly the same as with the hybrid versions. 407 liter fits in this space here over here, and then you take this parcel shelf out. Unfortunately, it's a one solid piece parcel shelf, so you have to stow that somewhere. There is an area over here, by the way, and if you fold down the rear seats, you have 1300 liters of cargo space. There's a large charging cable over here, a solid trunk floor with quite a significant space underneath here. I'll show you in the close-up, but this cargo space is super usable. It's nice and square and flat, and the floor is in line with the opening, so it's super usable, it's super practical. So I finally sit down dry while my camera is standing in the rain. Let's power up the car for a second over here. The interior, yeah, it's basically the same as in the hybrid version. Only difference in this car is that these lower sections and the door panel and the seats aren't white. They're real dark gray, almost to a level where it's black. But the upper part of the interior is white. This car has a large sunroof, slides and tilts. Yeah, this being the top of the range trim level, it comes with all the luxury, so heated seat, heated steering wheel, and these seats are also ventilated. Now, I can imagine that in summertime these seats get really hot, especially when you have this slider open, sun hits the car. It's synthetic leather, but it has the same downside as genuine leather. It gets really hot, and well, those ventilated seats are more than welcome. Of course, in this range of car you don't have a ventilated back seat like I had in the Lexus RX, but it does have a heated back seat. And yeah, the interior, same as with the hybrid. The thing I like is that the dashboard itself, it's really short, and this line of the instrument panel, those two stitch screens, is very low, so you have really good oversight through the front window. It feels incredibly spacious. Nice aluminium-like materials over here. There's this array of buttons for the charger, 2 USB-C outlets, and with a click of a button I can change one charger from charging to data transmission if you hook up your smartphone or any other device, so it can communicate with the infotainment. Infotainment is working well, it's nice and fast, and Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are really fast to connect wireless. That's really good. Yeah, other than that, as said, everything is basically the same. So if you want to have a more detailed view of the interior, I recommend you go watch the video on the Hyundai Kona Hybrid, which link is over there. Now let's hop over to the back and see if there are any differences, because there are. So let's quickly hop in the back. Now, I was just wondering if these rear seats recline. Yeah, they do, but when they're fully reclined, I'm, well, leaning all the way back. Put them up in the normal position. I still have quite some lean going on. So the interior is the same as in the hybrid. 2 USB-C outlets. What I have over here, an armrest, 2 cup holders. There's a button for the heated seat, and it has 3 positions. And the big difference is that over here I have a small sliding panel. It's a 230 volt 50 Hertz 16 amp outlet, so you can take your air fryer or your hair dryer in here and do your thing. Yeah, this car has the optional sunroof. Yeah, that reduces the height, but for me it's good enough. I have enough legroom. I can stow my toes under the driver's seat in my driving position, so this is all good. So what do you say? Shall we head out for a drive? Let's go. This car has a nice ingress and E function on the driver's seat. I have my stopwatch over here, and I want to count down how long it takes after a start before I can switch off the speed limit warning. That's something I personally find annoying, which I always switch off, and it takes some time. So, well, start this, start the timer. System is already started up. Push the preset button, speed limit, scroll over, put it off, and now it's off. In this case it took 10 seconds because the car was just on during filming. But what the point I wanted to make, if you have a car set overnight, you get in the car, it usually takes 30 to 40 seconds before you have that switched off. And that's something you want to do before you drive off and not do that during driving. So anyway, let's put on my seatbelt and go for a drive. So, and we're off. Let's switch on the heated seats and the heated steering wheel. I mentioned this often before in the EV test. When you have a heated seat at the minimum and a heated steering wheel, it gives a sense of comfort without heating the entire cabin. Now most of the Hyundais and Kias also have a driver only function so that the cabin heater is working, but the hot air is only coming from the vents that face the driver. And it really works well. It helps, well, increase efficiency. But as you have seen, it's been raining quite a bit. When you start using the wipers, that really has an effect on the range of the car. And that has always been the case with the electric cars. Once the weather gets worse, it doesn't even have to be cold, but when you have, well, inclement weather, when it starts raining, use the wipers. That really eats off of your electric range. Now, the standard version of this car, with a smaller battery and the larger battery, have a standard wheel size of 18-inch, and this top of the range trim level comes with the optional 20-inch wheels. And those larger wheels also have a large decreasing effect on the range of this car. So if you want to squeeze out every kilometer out of this battery pack, you should stick to the standard wheel size. So just recently I got a viewer question, and he was comparing the Kona Hybrid with the Nissan Qashqai e-Power, and he had a question about the instrument panel and the gear selection lever. This top of the range version also has, let me put on the indicator really quick, those blind spot monitors in the instrument panel, which is very nice to have. And he asked if I prefer that over the more traditional digital dates cluster in the Nissan Qashqai, and what I thought about this gear selection lever. Now, I answered his question, but I didn't go into his original question of whether how much I like this blind spot monitor and this gear selection lever. When I get into another car and I don't have this blind spot monitor, I don't miss it. But when I do have it, I think it's a really nice thing to have, because I live in an area where there are a lot of bicyclists, because hey, this is the Netherlands, and oftentimes when I bring the kids to school, you have to share the road with bicyclists which are, well, always beside your car. And this gives so much extra sight, this blind spot monitor. It's such a breath of fresh air to have this thing. So if you live in an area where you do a lot of inner town driving, or where there are a lot of smaller other vehicles on the roads, like bicyclists, scooters, I name something, this is a very nice thing to have. When it comes to the gear selector lever, kind of depends. You get used to this very quickly, but our other cars, we have a Prius which has a lever over here, and then we have the Lexus and the smaller Starlet. Both are automatics and they have the lever over here. Every time I change cars and get into this and I approach an intersection, oftentimes I want to shift or stop the car and go into reverse. My hand always floats around here to grab a non-existent lever because it's over here. So when you change a lot between cars, it's a bit hard to get used to this. But I've been driving this car for 3-4 days now, and I don't have any issues with that. And there we had a speed bump I was looking for, because I wanted to mention this, and I said it, I think often before when I tested an EV. There seems to be some odd behavior in EVs when it comes to the rear axle suspension. This car is quite smooth, but what I always notice when you approach a speed bump and the rear axle goes to the on-ramp, to the uphill part, once it's on top, the suspension, the spring decompresses, and the shock absorbers don't slow down that rebound all too much, so it bumps quite a bit. It starts to float, and this has a little extra rebound. It's smooth, it's soft. When you're in the driver's seat, you don't notice it that much. I had it, for instance, in the Nissan Ariya. When you went over a speed bump, that car jumped up so fast that when you had a charging cable on the trunk floor, it would hit the partial shelf. That's how big of a jump that made. This is a bit more floaty, and in the driver's seat it isn't all that bad. But when you're sat in the rear seat, it's not fun. And that's something a lot of EVs have, and I don't know why manufacturers choose to go for a setup like this. So if you can fill me in on that, please do. Now you will notice when you drive the EV back to the hybrid that this is a much heavier car. As tested, this car weighs 1619 kilos, whereas the tested hybrid was 1410 kilos. So there is a significant weight difference. Well, they adjusted that nicely with the suspension. This is a very quiet car. The steering is somewhat indirect. I'll get to that in a second. But well, it enforces sort of a calmer driving style, and the car, oh, take a break, it says. Yeah, I could use a coffee, but so that was a 10-second coffee break warning. And that was a driver attention warning. So yeah, that's how this system works in reality. I was talking about suspension. So yeah, it's very soft sprung. Wouldn't say it's floaty. In corners that isn't that much body roll, but overall it's a very comfortable car to drive. Now onto the steering. I'm not sure if it's just me or if it's factually correct, but the steering in this car feels slower, so more indirect than in the hybrid. And it's most noticeable when you do in-town driving and you go around a corner, say a 90-degree corner. I steer in, and halfway through the corner I have to put in an extra little bit of steer input to make it around the corner without getting onto the oncoming lane. So it always needs a little extra push in the end, and I don't recall the hybrid having that. So I'm not sure if it has a different steering ratio. I haven't been able to find anything about that in the brochure and the technical data. I will ask the folks of Hyundai, or maybe you folks know, so let me know down below in the comments. But it doesn't really bother me, it's something that I just noticed. Now from the subject of steering, let's dive into the calibration of the car. And with the calibration I mean how the car responds to the driver's inputs. We discussed the steering. When you look at acceleration and brakes, things feel very natural. This car doesn't take any time to get used to. You get in, you drive off, and it's like you've always been driving this car. It's very smooth, and of course there are several drive modes. Always been driving in the normal drive mode during this test, and yeah, it's very easy to get used to. Even if it's your first time in your car, it's like you've been driving this car for years and years. I do have a remark about braking, and I think I've mentioned that before. Also, you can use regenerative braking, and it works perfectly fine. But every now and then, when you're on the full regenerative braking, you have to use the brake pedal to brake a little bit extra. And once you have slowed down to the desired speed and you take your foot off the pedal, you're still under full regenerative braking. In this car, it's impossible to adjust the regenerative braking while you have your foot on the pedal. So every now and then I approach a traffic situation where full regenerative braking isn't enough. I have to use a little bit of the foot brake and then take my foot off the brake, and the car stays under heavy braking, slowing the car down too much. So I wish I could adjust it while I use the foot brake to lighten the regenerative braking, and that's impossible in this car. Other brands do have that possibility, and that's something that needs improvement in my opinion. Now, before I end this driving segment, there are two more things I wanted to point out. One is a negative, one is a positive. Starting with the negative, and that's the automatic high beams on this car. It has LED headlights. They are not adaptive, but they do have automatic high beams, and the automatic high beams are a bit late to respond to oncoming traffic. I had it many times that oncoming traffic were flashing their headlights because my high beams were blinding them, and only when the other drivers were flashing them they would go to dip beams. That needs improvement. The second thing I want to point out is the positive is the quality of the seats, and that's something that's unique to Hyundai. I think the seats have always been very good. My own daily driver is the smallest Hyundai model, an i10, and I'll do a video on that anytime soon. That little car has great seats, literally great seats. They are large, they are comfortable, and the same goes for any other model. It's the same in this. Now this car has electric adjustments on both front seats, and they are heated and they're ventilated, but the support and seating comfort is just great. So if you're sensitive to quality of seats, if you need good and comfortable seats with plenty of support, Hyundai is always a good place to go. So with that being said, let's head out to the middle of nowhere and hope for a dry spell, and I'll give you my final thoughts and some food for thought as promised. Well, as you can see, we've landed in the middle of nowhere, but it's quite windy, so let's head inside the car where I'll give you my final thoughts. So I've been living for a couple of days with this car now, and I haven't had time to look at the average power consumption, so that's something I'll blink and screen here. I have to return the car tomorrow, so I'll do a final measurement. And I also didn't discuss the ranges for the various battery sizes and wheel sizes, so I'll blink them in screen right here. Something I forgot to mention in the under the hood segment. All in all, this is a pretty impressive car, and I would say this is one of the better EVs on the market, even despite the fact that Chinese are coming, and they are generally less expensive. I must say that the Hyundai Kona Electric is on the more expensive side of things. Price is starting at 40,000 euros, and as tested this car costs 51,200 euros. So yeah, that's a large sum of money, and that will be different in any other country outside the Netherlands. Yeah, all in all, I'm pretty happy with the build quality. It has a real nice interior. It's super usable. I think it looks nice. It's a matter of taste, but I like the design, and I especially like this red color on the car. It really suits it well. I think it red car always stands out, and this car with these wheels is a pretty nice car to look at. I like it anyway. There are some small negatives, and the one about the automatic high beams is a negative you don't have if you opt for a lower trim level. And if you would ask me which trim level would I choose, if you get those synthetic leather seats, you need to have ventilated seats, especially when you choose for those black seats. I would suggest you go for cloth upholstery, because in my personal experience with Hyundai cloth upholstery, they're really easy to keep clean and to vacuum and all. We got a stain on them, it's fairly easy to get it out. And if you look at one of those detailing videos like this one over here, where they detail a disaster Hyundai, or maybe a Kia, I can't really remember, but you'll see that car is trashed. It has cloth upholstery and they get it spotless. So that's a good detailer, but it also tells you something about the quality of cloth seat. And by choosing a Kona Electric with a mid-range trim level with cloth seat, you can save out a fair amount of money, and maybe then you can afford a larger battery pack, but that's your choice. It's a pretty good car, but it's a bit on the expensive side of things, but that goes for a lot of modern cars. I know, the electronic nanas that started beeping, it's a negative for me, but it's true for all new cars nowadays, and I hope manufacturers will find a way to improve upon that. So those are my final thoughts. I said in the intro, I also have some food for thought. I live in a country where we have a good charger network, and the government has spent billions on promoting electric cars with subsidies and tax reductions, and they spend a lot of money in public charging points and all. I think we're at the tipping point in the acceptance and the success of the EV at this moment, because in a couple of days that I've been driving this car, I've experienced a lot of problems with public charging poles. I live in a small town with a population of 950. There are about 200 cars, of which 20 are electric, and all of these folks that have an electric car have a wall outlet on the driveway or on the private parking spot. I personally don't have that, so I need to use the public charging point. And that's been broken for 5-6 months now. The last car that I charged on that was the Lexus RX and was broken back then. It was October, November, so now it's almost March. And I called the local government, the municipality, and they said, no, it's not our business. You should call the electric company, and they don't know. All in all, no one is repairing that charger. When you look at the chargers along highways, well, with the ones you have with gas stations, there are a lot of fast chargers capable of up to 350 kilowatt of fast charging. So if you have an Ioniq 5 or a Kia EV6, well, you can use that fast charging. There are two problems with that. When you have multiple cars trying to fast charge, no one of these cars, not any, will get 350 kilowatts of power, because we have net congestion and the local transformer tones down the charging power. So all in all, no one of the cars that is capable of charging from 10 to 80% within 20 minutes can do that, because the power is toned down. When you have to rely on chargers along highway, you have to wait in line and you never can get the charging speed. It's starting to break down in that sense that there are too many EVs, and we have the problem of net congestion. That's becoming a real problem. This week in the news is that the companies that run the electricity grid want to tone down public charges, and they want to tone down people charging at home between 4 p.m. and 8 p.m. when everybody gets home from work and all, plugs a car in. The grid is simply overloaded, and you have to know that I live in a very rich country where a set of billions spent on EVs, and especially the charges along the way, but it's starting to crumble down. A lot of those public chargers are 10 years old by now, and either there is an electric problem, or I have problem with this reader. This is the card, an NFC reader that you put in there, and that oftentimes doesn't work. There's always some kind of communication problem. So if it starts down in a rich country that spent billions on the electric cars and the charging network and starting to crumble down, I don't see a bright future for EVs, and that's something to keep in mind. So that can be very different in your country, but I see EVs starting to fail. It has to change this year, or otherwise I think it'll be a failure. What is important to know that if you were to buy an EV or a Hyundai Kona Electric for that matter, it's nice to have your own private wall outlet or charging point, preferably on your own highway or at a parking spot near your house. I can do that, and that's why an EV won't work for me. And now that I see a lot of those public charges being broken down, or there's always a problem with that, charging along the highway means that I have to wait in line, so that costs a lot of time. And also the kilowatt hour price for those public charges and charge along the highway is pretty high. At this point, my private car, which does 20 kilometers a liter at least, costs about half of what it cost me to drive this car when I had to use a public charger. So there's that. Do with it what you want. take it in consideration. And with that, I would like to end this real-life car review. I hope you liked following me along, and if you did, please consider subscribing to the channel, put on notifications, and give me a like, leave a comment if you have a question or any constructive feedback. And if you like this kind of content and you would help me out, this is something I do next to my day job, and I pay for all of this myself. If you want to help support the channel, you can do so by buying me a coffee. And for now, I would like to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye!